On this week's episode, I'm going to talk with you about some things that you should not do in a job interview. We often tell you the things that you should do in an interview, but today I'm going to remind you of a few things that could ruin your job interview. I have some information that you might be interested in if you're thinking about going to Blackhawk College next year, and I will share this week's job leads with you. It is the week of April 7th through the 11th, and this is the QC Step Podcast. Hi, and welcome to this week's episode of the QC Step Podcast. I'm Corey Finneran, and this podcast is available in audio and video on our website, qcstep.com. The audio version is also available for free in iTunes and on Stitcher Smart Radio, and the video version is available on YouTube, and the closed captioning is provided by YouTube. You can connect with QC Step on Facebook, qcstep.com/Facebook. We are on Twitter and Instagram, and that's at QC Step. If you're thinking about going to Blackhawk College next year, I would encourage you to watch an interview that I did last year about this time with Susan Sacco. And Susan is the Disability Services Coordinator at Blackhawk. And you can find that interview by going to qcstep.com/Blackhawk. And in that interview, I asked Susan about the timeline and what students should be doing as they prepare to enroll at Blackhawk. And I also asked her about the differences between high school and college for students with IEPs. And there's a lot of good information in that discussion. And if you're planning on attending Blackhawk or really any other college, I would suggest that you watch it. And again, that video is at qcstep.com/Blackhawk. Well, here on the podcast, I talk a lot about the things that you should do in your job search and with your applications and in your interviews. And Gary and Cari, when they're meeting with you, they go through tips on these things too. Well, we spend a lot of time on the things that you should do, but I don't talk very much about the things that you should not do. And so today, I'm going to go over 10 things that you should not do in a job interview. The first thing that you should not do in a job interview is appear disinterested. Employers and hiring managers, they want employees that look excited to be there and employees that look interested in helping their customers. And there should be a lot about the job interview that excites you. You have the opportunity to showcase yourself, to hopefully have the opportunity to learn new things, meet new people, and make money. Money excites people, and if the prospect of making money, if that's what trips your trigger, then get excited in the interview about that. You know, think about the car that you're saving up for or whatever you plan to spend that money on. If you don't look interested in the interview, you're not going to wow anyone into offering you a job. The second thing that you should not do in an interview is dress inappropriately. A lot of teenagers have trouble with this. You should not wear your everyday clothes to an interview. If you have an interview and you're not sure what to wear, then talk with your step or your co-op teacher or talk with Gary or Cari. We know that first impressions are very important with job interviews, and what you are wearing, that will be a large part of that first impression. The third thing that you should not do in a job interview is talk negatively about your current or your previous employer. In general, you should not bring any negativity into a job interview. But if you talk poorly about your current or your previous employers, then the person that's interviewing you, they're going to think that you will probably, well, first off, they're going to think that you're just a complainer and that you're an unhappy worker, but they're going to think that you will eventually be complaining about them and their business. So leave all negativity out of your interview. The fourth thing that you should not do in an interview, this involves your phone. Not only should you not answer your phone or text during an interview, but don't even look at your phone. Turn the ringer off, or better yet, just turn your entire phone off. Leave it in your car or in your pocket or your purse and just leave it there. If you can't get through an interview without looking at your phone, you're showing a potential employer that you really aren't that interested, and there are other things that you find more important, things other than that interview. So leave your phone alone. The fifth thing that you should not do in a job interview is to provide too much personal information. It's good to be thorough in your answers, and it's good to provide specific examples about things, but you don't want to provide too much personal information, and don't get off topic and talk about things that don't relate to the job or the discussion in that interview. If you share too much, or if you get off topic too much, that employer will have serious questions about your ability to stay on task. If you share too much, they may be concerned that you might bring some drama into the workplace. They might be concerned that you would share too much personal information with their customers. In an interview, keep it to the topic at hand. The sixth thing that you should not do in a job interview is have a weak handshake. I talked about first impressions with what you're wearing, and if you introduce yourself and shake the person's hand like you should, and your handshake is too weak, that will give a bad first impression. You don't need to have a bodybuilder handshake, and you're not trying to flex your muscles to give the handshake, but a weak handshake shows insecurity and it shows a lack of confidence. And a nice firm handshake shows that you're confident in your skills and your abilities, and that you're ready to put the best foot forward and land that job. The seventh thing that you should not do in an interview is to cross your arms over your chest like this. Body language is extremely important, and if the chair that you're sitting in has arms, then rest your arms on the arm of the chair. And if it doesn't have arms, then set your hands in your lap. And if someone crosses their arms like this, then the body language that they're giving off is that they're closing themselves off and that they're not interested in what the other person is saying. It's a negative form of body language. Even if you're just doing it because you don't know where to put your hands or your arms, you're giving off a negative vibe, and you should avoid doing that. The eighth thing that you should not do in an interview is to fidget. Fidgeting is one of those things that you can be doing it without even realizing that you're doing it. If you're interviewing at a table, maybe there's something on the table that you're fidgeting with. Or if you brought in your resume or your portfolio and you still have that in your hands, you could be fidgeting with that. Or maybe it's your shirt or your pants or your hair. Fidgeting could also be bouncing your knee. And if you fidget, you appear uneasy and uncomfortable, and that will affect how confident you seem. So avoid the things that might make you fidget, and if you catch yourself doing it, be aware of it through the rest of the interview so that you can avoid it. The ninth thing that you should not do in an interview is appear uninformed about the company or the position that you're applying for. I've talked before on the podcast about doing your research on the company, and I talked about this in my presentation on using social networking to get a job. I've been in some of your classrooms talking about that. So connect with the company on Facebook and Twitter ahead of time and start to pay attention to the terminology and the language that they use. You will learn what is important to their business, and then you can use that in the interview. But when you do your research, you know what the company is about, you will know who their customers are, and you will know what the position that you're applying for involves. And if you go into the interview informed and prepared in this area, the employer will recognize that this interview and this opportunity are important to you. The 10th thing that you should not do in an interview is to not ask good questions when the interviewer asks if you have any questions. Have 3 or 4 questions ahead of time, ready ahead of time. And if the interview is thorough and the interviewer answers all of those questions over the course of the interview, sometimes that happens, then don't force things and don't ask a question just because you feel like you need to. If that happens, you could say, I did have some questions coming into the interview, but while we talked, you answered all of my questions and everything that I had. But I may think of something after I leave. So if so, what would be the best way to contact you? And by doing that, you not only have their contact information to get the answer of that question that you might think of after you leave, but you also have their information so you know how to contact that person if you have not heard an answer, if you were hired or not, and you need to follow up with that employer. So I threw a lot at you here, but I think that these are really important if you would like to be successful with a job interview. If you don't appear disinterested, you don't dress inappropriately, Don't talk negatively about your current or previous employer. Don't look at your phone. Don't provide too much personal information. Don't have a weak handshake. Don't cross your arms. Don't fidget. Don't appear uninformed about the company or the position that you're applying for. And the last one would involve a really weird double negative. So if you don't not ask good questions, or you don't ask bad questions, if you follow this list of 10 things not to do in a job interview, you will give yourself a better chance to make a good impression on that employer, which will ultimately give you a better chance of being offered that position. So let's take a look at the places that are hiring and accepting applications so that you can apply and hopefully get interviews to practice the things that I just talked about. The Rock Island Hy-Vee is hiring a few positions. They're hiring bussers, dishwashers, and kitchen clerks, and those positions close this Friday, so you don't want to wait around on those. Farm and Fleet in Moline is hiring part-time sales associates, and you need to get the paper applications from their store. Dairy Queen in Silvis is hiring, and you can get the application in their store too. And the PetSmart in Davenport is hiring pet bathers and cashiers. And you can find the online applications for Hy-Vee and PetSmart on our site at the bottom of this post for this podcast episode. You'll find the links there. And if you would like help with these or any other applications, you can contact Gary or Cari through your STEP or your co-op teacher, or you can email me info@qcstep.com, and I will pass it along to them. Well, that does it for this week's episode, and if you have a question on employment that you would like answered on the podcast, then you can send it to me through our Facebook, Twitter, or email. Thank you for downloading, watching, and listening, and I will be back next week with another episode of the QC Step Podcast.